Hey, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a simple networked FPS game with Godot 4 and Blender 3. I'll walk through it one step at a time, so check the timestamps in the description if you're only interested in certain parts. This project uses something called Universal Plugin. Now that we've got everything imported, let's go ahead and set up a basic environment scene. So right-click environment.blend, new inherited scene, click this plain mesh instance, and then over here in the inspector, surface material override, surface 0 is going to correspond to the floor and the walls, and surface 1 is going to correspond to that second material that we made, the one for all of these extra objects that we added. So for surface material 0, new standard material 3D, go into that, albedo, and then in our add-ons folder, Kenny prototype textures, I'm going to give it a dark texture, and I'll use texture underscore 09. I'll drag that into the texture field there, and then in UV1, click triplanar. That just makes it so that the texture is. Now that we've got this environment set up, let's set up a player scene so we can actually move around it. So I'll hit this plus button, other node, character body 3D, I'll call it player, control A, add a mesh instance 3D, and then I'm also going to add a collision shape 3D. For the mesh instance, I'll give it a capsule mesh, and the collision shape, I'll make a capsule shape. I'll shift click both of these, hold control, drag that up one unit, just that the bottom of the capsule is at the root position. Then on the player, control A, I'm going to add a camera 3D, and then I'll drag the camera up till it's right about there on the capsule. Then I'll click the player node, add a script, make sure you've got this template checked for basic movement. I'll create that. Currently the movement is mapped to the arrow keys, but I want to use WASD instead, so I'm going to add some new actions. Project settings, go to input map, add new actions, up, down, left, right. I'm also going to add a quit action, up, W, down, S, left, A, and then right. I'll map to D, and quit I'm going to map to escape. Okay, and then here I'm just going to remove all of these UI underscores and then this will be mapped to WASD instead. Okay, I'll save this scene, and then I'm going to go back to the world scene here, click the root node, Control-Shift-A, add that player scene, hit play, select current. Okay, so now I can move the player around, but we need to lock the cursor and make it so that when we move the cursor, the player rotates along with the camera. So I'm going to close this out. Also, I'm going to close this out. Also, when we lock the cursor, it does become a little bit of a nuisance to close the game. So on the world scene here, I'm going to add a script, and then I'll add a unhandled input function, and if input.isAction just pressed quit, get tree quit. So now I can just press escape and quit whenever I want. So I'll save that. I'll go back to the player script. Let's lock the cursor. So up top here, I'll add a func_ready function. Input.mousemode equals input.mousemode 2.05. This is just going to make it so that when we switch to vector, make sure that this is flash. Okay, so let's add that muzzle flash. So I'm going to go back to the 3D menu so that
Lowe's knows the best deals are the ones that keep on giving. So shop our 25 days of deals, where you can discover brand new offers. Ringing the
about some of the multiplayer aspects of this project, and we're going to start by making a main menu so that players can choose to either host or join an instance of the game, and then later when we start wiring that up, I'll explain a little bit about how the logic of that all works. So I'm going to go back to the world scene over here, and I'm going to start by deleting this player node here. That was just there for testing purposes. We're going to instance them in later in a different way. And then I'm going to go to the 2D view, close this panel, and then on the world node, I'll click that and Control-A, add a canvas layer, and to that I'm going to add a panel container, and I'm going to name that main menu, and then I'll give that a margin container, and I'll give the margin container a VBox container, and then in there, everything else is just going to be in the VBox container. I'm going to give it a label, I'll also give it a button, and I'm going to call that host button, and then I'll duplicate that, Control-D, and I'll call this next one join button, and then last but not least, Control-A, I'm going to add a line edit down there, and I'll call the line edit address entry. Okay, now let's add some text here. For the label, I'll say main menu, and then I'm going to set both of these to center alignment. Host button for the text, I'll put host. Join button, text is going to be join, and then address for the placeholder text, I'll put enter address to join here, and then I'll also align that center. Okay, now let's go to the main menu and click this and select full rect for the anchors. Margin container, theme overrides, constants, give all of these 15 so it's got some space around the edges, and then VBox container, theme overrides, select full rect. For the anchors. Margin container, theme overrides, constants, give all of these 15 so it's got some space around the edges, and then VBox container, theme overrides, constants, give it 15 separate. So there's some space between them. And then for the main menu, click hold Alt and then click one of these orange buttons here in the corner, and then just drag it in so it's nice and centered. That looks good to me. Let's make sure everything looks good. Yep, you can click these, type stuff in here. All right. Let's wire up these buttons and get some references to them. So host button, click that, and then go to the press signal here, double click that, connect, Same thing with the join button. With pressed, connect. Then I'm going to remove spaces here because I only put one line between my functions. And up here, I'm going to get references to main menu and address entry. So at onReadyVar main menu equals. Okay. And we are ready to start wiring some of this up. Address entry. Okay. And we are ready to start wiring some of this up then. Okay, so let's equals, and then you can actually just drag this in right over here. Okay, and at onReadyVar address entry equals address entry. Okay, and we are ready to start wiring some of this up then. Okay, so let's say the player clicks the host button. Well, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to hide the main menu with main menu.hide, and then we're going to have to create a server, and that server is going to have to live on an open port. So I'm going to go const port equals 9999. Typically any port over 1024 should be open, so this will probably work fine for you. Then I'll go var enetpeer equals enet multiplayer peer dot new, and then I'll create the server down here with enetpeer dot create server, and I'll pass in that port number. Then I'll go multiplayer peer equals that enet peer, and so now Now, once this runs, the server should be up and running. We just need to spawn in a player for the host. So let's get a reference to the player scene here. Const capital player equals preload. And then I'll drag in the player scene here. Okay, so now let's make a function down here so that we can actually spawn them. Func add player peer id var player equals player dot instantiate player dot name equals string peer id. This is going to be used for authority purposes later. And then add child player. Okay, so now we just call it from child. Child player. Okay, so now we just call it from up here. So add player, and then we can get the peer ID for the host by going multiplayer.get unique ID. Okay, so let's play this. The first time that you run this, it's probably, at least if you're on Windows, this is what it does for me. It's probably that you run the ID. Okay, so let's play this. The first time that you run this, it's probably, at least if you're on Windows, this is what it does for me. It's probably going to ask you if you want to give this application access to your private and public networks, and make sure that you give it access to public networks if you want to be able to play this online with friends later. But we can see that it's working just fine right now, so let's set up the client now as well. And I'm going to do that by copying these 3 lines right here. So I'll paste that, and we're going to change create server here to create client. And then we need to pass it an address, and because we're just testing things locally, for now we can just hard code this to localhost, and then we'll pass in the port right there. And we don't want to call add player on the join button. We only want to spawn players from the server. So how do we spawn a player when the client joins? Well, we can wire up a signal here on the server by going multiplayer.peer connected.connect, and we'll connect it to add player. So peer connected is a signal that's going to emit on the server every time a client connects to it. So it's going to connect to add player, it's going to pass in the new peer ID, and it'll spawn one every single time the client connects. So let's go to debug, run multiple instances, and we're going to run 2 instances now. So let's see. So up here, I'll host, and then down here, I'll join. And so what happened here is 2 players spawned. You can kind of see the animations going together, but they are colliding infinitely and it's propelling them upwards. So the way that I'm going to solve this is I'm just going to make it so that players don't collide, and I'm going to change the player layer here to 2, then I'll remove the 1, and let's try this again. So host, and I'll actually move over here and then join, and there we go. So 2 are connected. However, the host, the server, is controlling both of them right now, so we're going to have to fix that. Okay, so a second player connects when the client joins the server, but currently they only spawn in the server and they're both being controlled by the server. So there's a couple things we have to change here, but the first thing that I'm going to fix is I'm going to spawn the players in both instances. So I'm going to go to the world scene, I'll click world, Control A, and I'll add a multiplayer spawner node, then I'll go to spawn path, and we're instancing the players as a child of this world node here. So I'm going to select this as the spawn path, then I'll go to auto spawn list, add element. Click this folder icon, then I'll select player.tscn because this is what we're spawning and this is what we need spawned in all of the clients. So I'll open that there, save, and then let's try this again. So I'll host here and I'll move over here. Then I'll join. And then we can see that the client connects as well. And you can't see it because you can only see one player, but they're actually both spawned here. They're just both in the same exact spot because the authority hasn't been set yet. So currently we're just controlling both players, and it's still the same in all of the clients. So I'll open that there, save, and then let's try this again. So I'll host here and I'll move over here. Then I'll join. And then we can see that the client connects as well. And you can't see it because you can only see one player, but they're actually both spawned here. They're just both in the same exact spot because the authority hasn't been set yet. So currently we're just controlling both players, and it's still the same thing in this instance as well. So the next thing we'll do is we'll fix that. In order to make it so that the server and the client can only control their corresponding players, we need to set up the authority and connect it to their corresponding peer IDs. And since we set the player name to the peer IDs, this is going to be pretty easy. I'll go back into the player script over here, and then I'll make a function above ready called func_enter_tree. And then here I'll go set multiplayer authority string name to int, because this has to be an integer, and name actually isn't stored as a string. And then we're going to have to check for this authority in ready unhandled input and physics process. So starting with ready, we'll do if not is multiplayer authority. So if it's not the authority, return, don't execute this code. So we're going to add one more line here, and that is we want to make sure that the camera is current for the correct player character. So here we're going to say camera.current equals true. So that will make that the case. And then we'll just copy this line and we'll just drop it in the first line of unhandled input and physics process as well. And then I'll save. First line of unhandled input. Then we'll just copy this line and we'll just drop it in the first line. Line of unhandled input and physics process as well, and then I'll save. And then let's take a look. So over here, host. Okay, and then I'll join here. And there we go. I'm only controlling one character over here, and then on the server, it's the same case, but they're not synchronized, and that's the next thing that we have to fix. So just like with the world scene and the multiplayer spawner node, Godot 4 introduces a really simple way to synchronize things between scenes, and I'll add it here. I'll click Player, Control A, and that's going to be the multiplayer synchronizer node. So all we have to do is add the properties that we want to sync in here. So the ones that I'm going to sync are player position, player rotation, and camera rotation, just so we can see that pistol move up and down. Okay, and that's it. And player rotation and camera rotation, just so we can see that pistol move up and down. Okay, and that's it. It should work just like that.